It's May the 11th, 2022, and our reading today in Job is in chapter 8. Then Bildad the Shuhite replied, "How long will you say such things? Your words are a blustering wind. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. But if you will look to God and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your rightful place. Your beginnings will seem humble, so prosperous will your future be. Ask the former generations and find out what their fathers learned, for we were born only yesterday and know nothing, and our days on earth are but a shadow. Will they not instruct you and tell you? Will they not bring forth words from their understanding? Can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh? Can reeds thrive without water? While still growing and uncut, they wither more quickly than grass. Such is the destiny of all who forget God, so perishes the hope of the godless. What he trusts in is fragile, what he relies on is a spider's web. He leans on his web, but it gives way. He clings to it, but it does not hold. He is like a well-watered plant in the sunshine, spreading its shoots over the garden. It entwines its roots around a pile of rocks and looks for a place among the stones. But when it is torn from its spot, that place disowns it and says, "I never saw you." Surely its life withers away, and from the soil other plants grow. Surely God does not reject a blameless man or strengthen the hands of evildoers. He will yet fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. Your enemies will be clothed in shame, and the tents of the wicked will be no more. Amen. Well, now we have Bildad the Shuhite weighing in on the subject of Job and what's happening to Job. Now, Eliphaz, if you remember, was a rather courteous and I think genuinely caring sort of man, a real gentleman, I think we could say about him. By contrast, Bildad is what I'd call he's like he's like a Rottweiler. He's like an attack dog on this subject, and he weighs in straight away. He's angry, he's confrontational. Look what he says. How long will you say such things? Your words are blustering wind. When you think of what all that Job has gone through, when you think of the weeping and the wailing and the pain of the previous chapter, he's talking to him like this, and he thinks this will help him. Well, he obviously does. And again, it's not just there, pat on the back, let me get you a cup of tea. These people, these men, they believe something. And some of the things that they believe and say are right. For example, verse 3, does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? Well, that is a great universal truth put in the form of those questions. Nobody's going to deny that. Does God pervert justice? Well, of course he doesn't. Does the Almighty pervert what is right? Of course not. Everybody agrees with that. So there are some assumptions here which are right, just as there are in Islam or other great religions and great religious traditions. They would say something very similar to that. So that's good. That's truth. But it's the way that he then goes on to understand how it applies in the realities, in the ups and downs of life in this world. And the way in specifically now that he applies it so harshly, so unfeelingly to Job and to his children. Look what he says. When your children sinned against him, he gave them power over to the penalty of their sin. Well, everybody sins. So everybody should receive punishment and judgment from God in this world, then, shouldn't they? He doesn't see it like that. He doesn't see that there's an answer to sin, really, apart from trying to be good, trying to be a good person, as he'll go on to say, living that upright, godly, sort of traditionally moral life. But if your children have been killed, Job, then it proves that they must have sinned. Otherwise, God wouldn't have allowed them to have come to such a terrible end. That's the kind of logic of his thinking. Quite apart from the fact, if you remember back in chapter 1 and verse 5, the pains that Job went to make sacrifices for the sins of his children, and so on, and so on. That doesn't enter into it. What a terrible thing to say. Sometimes people do say things like this. Oh, well, that relative of yours or that friend of yours, what's happened to them, the way they've ended up, and they're dead now. Well, they're obviously in hell. I've heard even Christians talk like that. No humility, no compassion from this man at this stage. This way of looking at things, and he'll develop it now in the following verses, is a false teaching. It could be called the theory of retribution. And it's still so common in the world today generally, and particularly amongst strongly religious groups. Christopher Ash, and I'm recommending this to you as a good commentary if you want to read something more. He puts it like this. He says, Bildad's system of thought, his religious outlook, is pretty simple. It's a simple system of double retribution. Good things happen to good people, bad things to bad people. So we've dealt with the bad people, your children. That's why they ended up as they did. And yes, Job, you're struggling and you're going through what you're going through. You just need to shut up. You need to stop trying to improve yourself in different sort of ways. What you need to do, Job, is, sorry about the phone. What you need to do, Job, is you just need to verses 5 to 7. This is what you need to do. On a positive note, you need to get back with the Lord, get right with God. Verse 6, you just get pure and upright. Just become a good boy again. Whatever that sin is in your life that you're not telling us about, just sort of get rid of that somehow. And then, you see, God will prosper you, verse 7. And the goodies that have been taken away from you, you'll get them back. Again, brutal, simplistic, prosperity teaching. It sounds quite spiritual, actually, but we know where it comes from. It is deeply satanic. He then goes on to say some other things that sound pretty good. I mean, verses 8 to 10, I think, taken out of context, I agree with that. It's an appeal to tradition. It sounds very humble. It sounds very reasonable. Ask the former generations. We know nothing. Let's listen to our ancestors, people who know better than us. I like the sound of that. That's good. Except when you remember that the traditions, what the former generations taught, is actually this same system of the theology of retribution. That's what he's talking about. And yes, there's a great history to that. and their ancestors have taught that. So he's saying, look, listen to them. If you're not convinced by me, think what our ancestors have said. Many people will argue like that still today. And then he finishes with two final illustrations, and they're both to do with plants. First of all, it's a negative in verses 11 to 15. It's the papyrus reeds that he refers to. And it's a negative illustration. While still growing and uncut, they wither more quickly than grass, verse 12. He seems to be talking about, in a general way, about the wicked, about people who don't know God. Look what it says, verse 13. Such is the destiny of all who forget God, so perishes the hope of the godless. He's making a general point there, which fits in with his theology, but it could well be, having spoken about Job's children, that's really what he's saying. Your children, you see, they forgot God. They did curse God, and they have no hope. They've become the godless. That's why they perished in this life. That's his thinking there. But then there's another plant, verses 16 to 19, that seems to be more positive. On the one hand, there's the wicked. This plant, verses 16 to 19, is a well-watered plant in the sunshine. So he's probably talking here about the righteous, or as he goes on to say in verse 20, the blameless. Again, those who live a righteous life, how do you define that? It's by his own definition, according to his own terms, very much to do with this world and worldly ideas of goodness and righteousness. But anyway, that's what we need now, Job, for you. Take my advice, take our advice. We're trying to help you, Job. Listen to what we've got to say. Stop complaining. Forget about what's happened. Just sort yourself out. Get right with God. Become righteous again. And then the Lord will reward you. And you'll become prosperous again. Verses 20 to 21. That's how the chapter ends. But Job is not being punished by God for his sins. This is a man who feared God, who was blameless in all his ways. Bildad's teaching is a counsel of despair. It's false. It's empty. There's no comfort for anybody here. There is suffering in this world, like with Job and his children, that can never be explained or understood. Now, we've got some understanding because we've read chapters 1 and 2, but Bildad doesn't have a clue. He's in the dark. Job doesn't have a clue. He's in the dark. There is mysterious and unexplained and unexplainable dimensions to human suffering. And there is redemptive suffering. That's where everything is heading. And everything in the book of Job, even a chapter like chapter 8, Bildad has no category for this, has no understanding of this. But if we know the whole Bible, then we know that there is such a thing as a suffering which is redemptive, which is saving through the cross. It is by that means that ultimately is the answer to all suffering and is the answer to everything in our lives. And it's ultimately the cross that will bring us comfort and help and healing and salvation. Job is crying out for that. He's looking for that. He'll taste that to some degree, as much as anybody can in the Old Testament, certainly this far back anyway, at the beginning. But it's what's fully revealed in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. I think we'll keep coming back to these verses because they really complete and fulfill and give us the perfect picture for everything that's gone on before. So when Paul speaks about Christ crucified. In 1 Corinthians 1, verse 23, he says, "We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God, for the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength."